Let's stay in Canberra now. Joining me, of course, our Sky News political contributor, Chris Uhlmann. We'll get to a whole lot of other issues, but I've got to start with something you and I go back to over and over again, but it is really ramping up internally in terms of the political temperature inside the coalition. Chris, that's, of course, net zero. This has not abated while I was away. We've got Barnaby Joyce out there, of course, pushing hard his private member's bill. Until such time Labor says we're going to put it on for debate, now he's telling people, including frontbencher Andrew Hastie, I actually don't want you to vote for it. Well, how does that make sense?
Well, it really doesn't, and it puts Andrew Hastie in a difficult position, of course, because he is in the shadow cabinet, but he has also made it pretty clear that he doesn't believe that net zero is an achievable target, and both you and I both know that it's a fantasy target, but that doesn't mean that the politics of this isn't incredibly difficult, Peter, because most of the population now, it would appear, if you go by the public polling, has signed up to the idea that net zero is in some way a way of saying that you believe in climate change, and that's certainly the way that the government is positioning it. So it's difficult for the opposition, partly because it's never really made the case properly about net zero and what the costs of net zero will be to ordinary people. And electricity, as you and I again both know, is a very small part of that. I mean, I would really hope that the coalition could get their act together, at least to do this, to focus all of that energy that it has about this particular simply on the government, to pursue the government on costs and on the claim that this will be greener. The claim's always been it will be greener and it will be cheaper. It's going to be neither. People's bills will continue to climb. That's one way of separating people from whether or not they believe that this is a target they want to hit, because if you ever ask people in polling about how much they're prepared to pay, not very much at all to hit these targets. The other thing is there's a huge environmental argument, and that by 2060 we are going to need a landmass 1.6 times the size of Tasmania to build all this stuff and then connect it by transmission lines. It doesn't add up on either front.
What's interesting is the coalition has got obviously a raft of reviews underway, and I think they think they've got the luxury of a couple of years to work out their position and then run it into the next election. That was the problem with Peter Dutton at the last election, was things were not socialised long enough. They were not arguing their case for enough time with the electorate. I think they left too much for the campaign period, and as we know, it gets lost in the noise. I think they need a position on this sooner rather than later. I agree with you, they can't keep sitting on the fence, but why don't they at least create a threshold number for world action before Australia gets involved? You know, we're 1% of the problem. We're leading the world in terms of our response. We're dogging our own economy and our budget to do that. We're hitting consumers hard. Why don't we have a position that says and avoids the fight about is climate change real or not, because that's where the left want the coalition to go. But they have a position that says unless 60% of the world or 70% of the world or X number of the big emitters are committed and are showing action, we're not going to buy into it. Why don't we have a sensible position like that?
Well, it's a very good question. I think that it's not a particularly difficult argument to make, which is that you can say that you believe that climate change is real, that humans have some hand in that, but that unless the entire world acts together, then nothing is really done about it. We are 1% of the world's problem. Nothing we do in Australia will make any difference. But what we can do is beggar our economy, and that is what we are doing. So the pathway that we are on, you've got to separate the problem from the solution, and the solution that's being proposed is preposterous. It will cost a fortune, it will beggar Australia, and it won't solve the problem. So we need to work out how we spend our money wisely. And so I think the coalition has got to focus in on cost and the environment. They're two issues that people care about, and make the argument there. They've got to do the groundwork. But, Peter, they never do the groundwork. They never make the case. And I appreciate this. You know, I'm trying to make the case. It is a long, hard road to hoe. I know the large bulk of the population doesn't necessarily understand the problem at the moment, but they can be made to understand, and that's the coalition's job.
Yeah, Chris, that's where the left have profited on this issue from day one, right? The complexity of the issue, the goodwill all of us have for the environment, the fact that the left, put cursory amounts of information out there. I think the thought that, sun's free and the wind's free, so renewables must be cheaper. That's the line from Labor. Of course, we know that that's not true. And unless you've got someone with a cut-through of a Tony Abbott who can take a complex issue, distill it and make it simple, as he did all those years ago and cut through on this issue. If you run it as a global argument of chest beating at the UN and all that stuff, you're going to lose. If you make it an economic argument, I think right now you're right, talking about our pristine national parks, our farmland, our beautiful oceans, they're also being degraded now, and that's very apparent for people. I think that's how you win the fight. And you have a threshold. I think you've got to require a threshold of world action before we start junking our prosperity and chasing this pipe dream.
Yeah, look, Peter, I don't think that the government has much to fear from the coalition at the moment, not the way that they're running the argument, but I do think that they have something to fear from Bob Brown in Tasmania, because he's running a campaign down there on environmental grounds against wind turbines. And if that spreads outside of Tasmania, which it well could, to the broader community, because someone like Bob Brown has the green credentials to be able to push that argument, to be able to say that we are not saving the environment. In fact, what we are doing, and the line that I would use, is that we are destroying the environment on the grounds that we're going to save the planet, and we're not doing either of those things. So I think there's plenty of ground on which the coalition can fight. It just needs to find the form of words and the energy to pursue something together.
You and I both know you lose 100% of the fights you're not in, and that's where the coalition is right now. Hey, give me your take on those rallies yesterday.
This is a real issue, Peter. People are very concerned about the level of migration in Australia, and of course they will always be dismissed as being racist, because that always happens. And I can take you back to the 1980s when people were talking about migration, and Geoffrey Blaney brought out a book called All for Australia, where he pointed out the reasonable fact that the people who make policy about migration do not live in the frontline cities where it lands, and that is still the same case in Australia now. And then you get gaslit about the fact that I can have 447,000 people come in, as they did last year, in net migration, and that won't have an effect on the housing stock. That won't change people's lives. But of course, again, those that argue against these Australians don't live where they live. They don't experience what they experience, the pressure that that puts on their lives. This is a big issue for the government. They can call those people racist if they want. But this issue about the amount of migration, I think those people on the streets represent a fraction of those who are concerned about it, and they're concerned on a number of fronts. One of them also is social cohesion. People are worried about the kind of country that we are building. Now, I believe that all people should come from everywhere to Australia, but they have to sign up to some certain foundational beliefs, and I'm not sure that the public is convinced that they do that at the moment. So there are a lot of issues on the street there, and of course there will always be extremists. But I didn't see, by the way, Peter, that when extremists joined the Palestinian marches across the bridge, that much was made of that. So I think that two different standards are being applied, but in the end, this is an issue the government will not be able to run away from.
100%. Just quickly, Daniel Andrews, Bob Carr frontlining a big event in China. What do you make of that?
Are you surprised, Peter? I would be surprised if Bob Carr wasn't going.
No, I'm not surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised if Dan Andrews does go. They've made their allegiances, shall I say, very, very clear. And when they're sitting there, they will be in the company of the North Korean leader and the Iranian leader, at least the parliamentary leader, and Vladimir Putin. So I guess you can tell a person by the company they keep.
Well, when Dan makes his millions out of China, which I know he's doing, I hope he gives back the poor Victorian taxpayers the $300,000 they're paying him right now as a retired premier, and at least until he properly retires. Chris, great to have you back on the show. Great to be back with you. We'll catch up next week.